Hi, everyone. So we're here today because there is a new study that's discovered that women can actually reduce weight gain in menopause and that diet can be key. In the largest study of its kind ever completed, researchers from nutrition company Zoe teamed up with King's College London, Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and Massachusetts General Hospital. And the study aimed to look at how menopause affects day-to-day metabolism and if there are any further implications for our weight and overall health. Now, as many of you know, this is a topic very close to my heart, as I've struggled for years with so many different perimenopause symptoms, which did include weight gain. And I'm also passionate about learning and sharing with all of you all the ways in which menopause can affect us, including the impact on our long-term health too. So I'm delighted today to welcome Professor Tim Spector, one of the key authors of the study, to delve a little deeper. Welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, it's a great pleasure.
Now, listen, before we chat, I just thought I'd give everyone a quick bit of background about you, although I'm sure you're a very familiar face to so many of us. So Tim is a medically qualified professor of epidemiology and the director of the Twins UK registry at King's College London. His current work focuses on the microbiome and nutrition, and he's the co-founder of the data science company Zoe Limited, which has commercialized a home kit for personalized nutrition. He's also the lead researcher behind the world's biggest citizen science health project, the Zoe COVID study, of over 4 million people, for which he was awarded an OBE. And having published more than 900 research articles, he's ranked in the top 100 of the world's most cited scientists by Google. And he's the author of 4 popular science books, including The Diet Myth and the most recent Spoon-Fed, which is a Sunday Times bestseller. So honestly, Tim, this is really fantastic. And it's quite, well, it's not funny, but I have avoided COVID for 2 years. And here I am sitting day 7 COVID. So it's timely to see you here. And I'm not going to ask you for any health advice, I promise.
Just don't follow the government health advice and you'll be all right.
I won't say this, that. Right. Okay, so listen, this study is fantastic. And obviously these sorts of insights are really, really helpful, you know, unraveling, as you have said, the kind of complex connections between lifestyle, hormones, metabolism and health. And I think, you know, in a way that wasn't possible before we had, you know, apps and social media. So can we talk about this study? First of all, how large was it and how did you choose the women to take part in it?
So there's so many studies we're talking about. So I guess we're talking about the Zoe Predict study.
Predict, sorry, yes, yeah.
Because we have the COVID studies and all these other ones. But the Zoe Predict study was really the first of its kind, and it was the first one, the largest intervention diet study of its kind, and we used the basis of twins mainly. So we took over 1,000 individuals in the first study, based at King's College London, which is, you know, the backdrop you see here, and most of them were twins, either identical or non-identical twins, mostly females, and in that sort of 40 to 70-year-old range generally. And we gave them all identical meals, and we took systematic bloods, and they had a whole day at St. Thomas's Hospital in our clinical research facility, where after, you know, they'd been fasting and sleeping in a very regimented way, we collected all the bloods at baseline, got their stool samples, got everything measured on scans, and then we gave them all these identical meals and saw how their blood changed over the next 12 hours, both in terms of blood sugar and blood fats, inflammation, and a whole variety of other measures. And that was the first step of the program. And then we gave them what now has become the sort of Zoe kit, which is a continuous glucose monitor, which you just stick on your arm like a bottle top, that is linked to your phone, so you get readouts of your blood glucose levels. Then they got a blood fat testing kit, which you do a finger prick test after eating a fatty meal, and another kit to collect your poo sample for your microbiome, and ability to log all your foods for the next 10 days. And that, with that information, we had no idea really what we were going to find. And so what was really amazing was that between normal women, these, because we didn't have any diseased people, these were just an average UK women, even though if they were twins, we saw a tenfold difference in their response to food. So tenfold difference in how high the sugar peaks were, tenfold difference in how long the fat lasted in their blood after that meal, and tenfold difference in inflammation. And we then put everything together using our computers and worked out that the microbiome explained a fair bit of this, and also things like when you had your previous meal, how well you slept, how much exercise, all sorts of things. And the thing that didn't explain much was genetics, which to me as a geneticist was quite surprising, but we had these amazing twins to look at, and it turned out that identical twins often had different responses to the same food. And what you saw on the label of your food had only a small effect on its response in your body. So everything we've been told about how important, looking at the label for calories and fats and sugars, and that's all you need, turned out to be not true, because we're all much more individual than we believe. And that really seems to be mainly down to the fact that even identical twins have very different gut microbes. So I've been struggling for years to work out why identical twins might be different for various things like cancer, heart disease, depression, obesity. And it turns out that I think I've found the main reason, which is that just like all of us have a unique set of gut microbes, twins, even if they're identical, also do. So they were the first findings we found, which really said, wow, this is amazing. We didn't know that there was this much variety, and by doing these systematic tests, we can come up with a clever algorithm that predicts how everyone will respond to any food if they do this test. So how you respond to carbohydrates, how you respond to fats, and whether you're going to get sugar peaks, dips, etc., which we now know we want to avoid, because there's lots of evidence now, including from this study, that people have lots of these sugar spikes that last a long time. People have lots of fat, take a long time for their fat to disappear from the blood after eating, produce low levels of inflammation that hangs around the body. There's just like a sort of continuous stress on the body that's like a metabolic stress. So that leads to metabolic imbalance, that leads to difficulty losing weight and often weight gain. It leads to increased risk of diabetes and heart disease, etc. So they're all small. Each day is a small increment, and by itself doesn't do anything. But if you multiply that over months and then years, you can see how these peaks are really important. And that was the basic element of what we studied, and that applied to men and women. But we saw that as you got older, the effects got bigger, the peaks got bigger, the fat hang around longer in your body, you're more likely to get inflammation. So it was sort of got more important as you got older. And it was only recently that we started to look more detail at the effect of the menopause in women. But
I mean, for me, it's very interesting because my best friend's a twin. So I hope she's actually watching this now, because, I often see them, compared to each other. And it's fascinating. I mean, in this group of women, were just out of interest, because I was eventually given HRT. It was the only thing that helped me with my symptoms. Were some of the women on hormone replacement therapy that were in this group?
In that first group, they weren't. We did add it in the second group, but initially we wanted people who who we could just look at what we thought were sort of normal ranges for people's age. So we excluded people on diabetes drugs and on hormonal therapies, etc. So it was only later, and we've now gathered information because we've now done these tests on nearly 20,000 people, that we do know more, and that we do know that HRT does reverse many of these peaks and really puts people into these other categories, because once we look now at the greater data set, we can see that when you adjust people by age, women by age of the same age, one menopausal, one premenopausal, you get a clear difference in the size of the glucose peaks, the size and amount of the fat peaks, and therefore the inflammation levels differ. And obviously it's an observational study, but we've tried to match for everything, including body weight and smoking and medications, the usual stuff. And there's a clear link implicating the menopause in this, and in a way to validate that, when you take the group taking HRT, they look like the premenopausal group, not like the postmenopausal group, even when you've adjusted for the different ages. So very much we're seeing that menopause is a real factor in accentuating these physiological changes that are responsible not only for these things like weight gain and diabetes, extra risk of disease, but also things that perhaps weren't realized before, because we've also discovered that these peaks are also associated with subsequent dips. And not everyone has these dips, but if you do have say you have a carbohydrate breakfast, like most people do in this country, their cereal, etc., and a cup of tea, and maybe some orange juice, you get a peak which would be greater after the menopause than it would be before, and you're then more likely to get a dip afterwards that goes below baseline. And we've shown that women who have those dips have much greater hunger and loss of energy 3 hours later, and throughout the day will eat about 10 to 20% more calories than someone who doesn't have a dip, given identical food. So that really is a really important fact, because it not only tells us the importance of these sugar profiles, but it also blows out of the water at the same time the idea that all calories are equal, because we were using these standardized muffins to do this test, and they're identical calories. But if you gave you and your friend or your sister the identical muffin, one might have a sugar dip and the other wouldn't, and that would make a difference to how much you ate in that day and how much weight you put on and how hungry you were. So clearly, this new research is really changing our whole way of thinking about food, and I think it's revolutionary, and I think it's really important, because the group that we didn't know this before, but what we've seen is that particularly relevant for menopausal women.
I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Because I grew up in the sort of the 80s, when it was all about, low fat, and then it's low sugar, and there's just been so many diet messages and counting calories, and there's just so much confusion. And when we were younger, we all we could just sort of lose weight very easily, and then we sort of hit this middle age, and we've almost all forgotten how to eat, and then we can't understand why we're not shifting a pound suddenly as we sort of hit our 40s and 50s. I mean, for those that don't know what the gut is, and gut health and gut microbiome, can you just explain briefly what it is and why it's important that we're eating gut healthy food?
Yeah, sure. So I talk about the gut microbiome, and it's a word that's commonly used now. It means the community of all the microscopic bugs that live in your gut, and most of them are in the lower part, the colon, 99% of them, and there are hundreds of trillions of them. They're the same number as there are cells in our body, and they're really like chemical factories. They convert food that you eat into thousands of different chemicals that do all kinds of things in your body. From they can produce nerve chemicals like serotonin that can make you happy or sad. They can send out signals to make you hungry or full. They interact with your immune system to stop you getting food allergies or autoimmune diseases, or fighting off cancer. And so that, as well as their daytime job of breaking down food into nutrients. So we've underestimated them massively. And collectively, it's good to think of your gut microbiome as a new organ in your body, like we just discovered a new liver. And in a way, this was why we need to think about food in a different way rather than just fuel, as you would just put coal into a furnace. It's much more sophisticated way of enriching and feeding our own natural gardens, so that we get this huge diversity of gut microbes that can then, the more diverse they are, the more diverse chemicals they can produce, particularly for our immune system and our brain and our well-being, to keep it balanced. And we know this because people that have a very poor diet have a rather poor microbiome, not many different species. They don't produce this huge range of good chemicals, and they get all these other illnesses that are related. And so particularly important as people transition from this healthy 30s and 40s, never get ill, never have any problems, what's going on, and suddenly don't have to worry about food or diet, and suddenly things start to go wrong. And it's important to realize the rationale of why. And I think once you understand that link between food, your gut microbes, and health, it gets a lot easier. And if people want to know more, for 99p, they can actually buy my second last book, The Diet Myth, on Amazon at the moment. But it's a complicated area that is getting is advancing extremely fast. But it's definitely something that everyone should know about.
And I'll put the links to obviously your books and at the very end. I mean, so what should we be, what types of foods should we be eating, and what should we be avoiding for, I mean, not just for, to help supporting us through menopause, but for long-term health? Because we obviously know there's, there's heart disease and dementia and osteoporosis and, sleep problems and, muscle loss and weight gain. And so is there kind of a one-size-fits-all, approach for menopausal women to consider? What are the sort of basics, I guess, is what I'm getting at?
Well, 10 years ago, I would have said, of course, we know the answer, and it's just there's, read my book and this is what you need to eat. But it's not really true anymore, because we know that some people do much better eating high-fat diets. Other people are better on high carbohydrate diets. And that's where this personalized nutrition tests come in to say, well, how do I get that balance right? And I think that's where you need to do these kind of tests. But I think everyone can still improve their diet to an extent if they focus just on the microbiome part of it, which is a third of the Zoe test, but it's still important because I think everyone, however good their gut microbes are, can always improve them, including myself. And I've got some rules that general easy rules to follow. First is try and have 30 plants a week in your diet. Sounds a lot. You looked a bit shocked, but you've got to remember what a plant is.
Yeah, I was going to say.
People forget what plants are, right? It's not just kale. It's not just spinach. It's nuts, it's seeds, it's herbs, it's spices. So, sprinkling on a selection of mixed nuts and berries, as I do every morning on my yogurt, I can get 10 plants just in one meal. So all you've got to be thinking of is just try a variety. That's the whole point, because that gives you a greater variety of gut microbes. So that's the first thing. And I don't mind if you add fish or you add meat or whatever. That probably is not as important as what other thing, how many plants you've got on your plate, that diversity. The second is to pick plants that are high in something called polyphenols. And these used to be called antioxidants, but that's a term that was used because no one really understood what they did, including most doctors. And it's a waffly term. And polyphenols is a better one because these are the defense chemicals in plants that give them their color, their bitterness, their complexity. They're in grape skins that give you that astringency when you eat them, in red wine. They're in coffee beans. They're in tea. They are in dark colored vegetables. They're particularly strong in berries, and they're in nuts and seeds. And they're also in strange things you wouldn't think about, like dark chocolate is a good source, and particularly strong is olive oil, particularly high quality olive oil, where you get masses of it. So that this whole new science of eating these plant chemicals in these foods that are now, we thought nuts, for example, chocolate, cocoa, coffee was bad for us. We now know they're actually good for us. And it's because of these chemicals in them, the plant chemicals, which actually feed our gut microbes. So I could go on forever about polyphenols. I'm a bit of a bore on that, so you need to move me on. But third one, fermentation, have regular, something microbially alive, fermented to eat every day. And that can be as boring as plain yogurt, but it has to be full fat, natural. It can be fermented milk, kefir, kombucha, kimchi, and sauerkraut, or it can be a good quality cheese. And finally, cut out ultra processed foods as much as you can, which are harmful for the gut microbes. So
yeah,
a few simple rules that everyone can do whilst they're waiting to get themselves personalized.
And just before there's a couple of questions in the Facebook group which I wouldn't mind asking you, but just before I get there, we were talking before Tim and I came on about your history, that you used to be a menopause specialist yourself. So what part does estrogen and possibly progesterone and testosterone play on weight management, I guess?
Well, we're still haven't really advanced much in this knowledge since, I was studying this 30 years ago. Interestingly, we know that shifts in the hormones are the major thing rather than the absolute levels. And I think that's the difference, because you're dealing with the actual levels of the hormones, then you have these receptors which act on them, and it's the change in levels at different times in your life, in puberty, and then menopause, and then gradual changes with age, that are the main factors. And we know, for example, that body weight is linked very closely to estrogen for puberty, and it triggers puberty. And so overweight children have very early puberties, and that's been a problem with obesity in children. So we know there's these strong links, and estrogen is stored in body fat as well, in forms. But we also know from our larger studies from the COVID health app that weight gain seems to be greater after the menopause, and symptoms are also greater in women who happen to be overweight at that time. So the symptoms are greater, and that could be, again, this idea that generally, if you're carrying a lot of excess fat, you've got a lot of estrogen on there, and so changes in it are relatively greater than if you're skinnier. So, but our knowledge is still pretty crude in this, and a lot of it just comes from knowing, well, if we give HRT, it gets better, therefore it must be important. It is still very difficult to study. The assays, the blood assays for estrogen are still not very good. They don't go down to really low levels. We know that it fluctuates a lot, and so one-off measurements aren't very useful. lots of things have made it difficult to study. And
I mean, it's interesting for me.
There's an interaction between body weight, estrogen, and symptoms as well.
Yeah, and it's funny because I tried for the 4 years I had all these symptoms to lose, I gained about 4 stone in weight, and I couldn't lose a pound just eating healthily and exercising. But I think the low mood that was caused by the estrogen levels plummeting, and then you become a hermit, and then you stop exercising, and then you crave sugary, high-fat food, and then you're in that vicious circle. And for me personally, a lot of women I've spoken to, it wasn't until I'd actually had my hormones balanced, and for me it was HRT, that I felt great again. I felt uplifted, I had energy, then I could address sort of eating well and exercising. And it's knowing where to attack this kind of vicious circle, because a lot of women can't or don't want to take HRT and have tried everything, and they're struggling desperately. And then there's others where it's the only solution. So I think this is going to be incredibly helpful for so many women. Can I just quickly, have you got time just for a couple of questions?
Sure.
One of the, excuse me for coughing, Ashley's asking, what are your thoughts on probiotic supplements?
Yeah, I often get asked this. So I wrote a review a couple of years ago, and we looked at all the studies and all the probiotics. And in general, you do find, of the 25 diseases we looked at, there was good evidence that 18 out of 25 were helped by probiotics. So that sounds great. But then you try and say, well, which probiotics would you recommend? And none of the studies used the same probiotic. They're all different. And I think the problem is that the quality of the probiotics is poor. We don't know which strains work. And I think there is this individuality there, that a strain that might work for me might not work for you, because we have a totally different set of microbe communities in there. And so we now know that they do get into the gut. They do hang around for a couple of days and they get eliminated. So a bit like fermented foods, you've got to keep them regular. So I think we still, in general, I think it's an approach that can work, but you may have to experiment with lots of different types until you find the one that actually suits your gut microbe. So at Zoe, we're actually working to see if we can personalize this. And once we've got your microbiome result, actually suggest certain probiotics that might work. But I'm more of a fan about having probiotic foods rather than supplements, because, for example, you're not going to find a probiotic supplement with more than 2 or 3 microbes in it. Whereas if you have a kefir or a kombucha, you can have over 30 different microbes. And so you're increasing your chances of success, I think, much greater. So I'd first try a real food before going for the bottle and the expensive chemist.
So, because someone else has also just asked about your views on supplements, food supplementation. So obviously vitamins and I mean, things like, obviously we hear all the time about vitamin D, and we heard it obviously a lot during the pandemic, but I think I'm assuming obviously we can't get that in our foods so much. I mean, there's fortified foods, but in terms of
most of this is marketing and hype,
Yeah.
People have got to realize that the vitamin industry is $1 billion industry, and every bus that goes past you in London's got a vitamin advert on it. It's for a reason. They're making so much money out of these poor quality vitamins, all made in factories in China, and with no evidence at all they work. And there's no evidence they worked in COVID. There's no evidence that they work in 99% of all diseases. Even my area, osteoporosis, there's no evidence that calcium and vitamin D help prevent fractures. So, and that's only when you do the proper randomized trial do you find that out. So food is the best way to get this in you. And for vitamin D, sunshine. And I'm a big fan of sunshine. So, oily fish, vegetables, and sunshine. That's what I'd go for.
Yeah, absolutely. So one last, I think it's Victoria, is finding the right food the answer to stop your boobs from getting larger during menopause? Oh, well, so in terms of estrogen in our food, I mean, what foods cause that? Because I know swelling is quite an issue for women in
Well, there
menopause.
was this whole story about so-called phytoestrogens, which just means plant estrogenic type compounds in foods.
Mm,
And there was a time when you could buy all this alternative estrogens to alternatives to HRT, sort of called natural progesterone or plant estrogens. And there's really no hard evidence that they do work. So maybe some lab studies in mice and things like this that are very poor quality, but I've not been convinced there's any human study they work. And there's this whole story about soy. Soy contains, in theory, estrogens.
yeah.
And there was a worry that soybeans in Europeans could increase breast cancer, but all the data from Asia shows it actually reduces breast cancer. And so I think largely it's all hyped, and we shouldn't be worrying. We shouldn't be worrying about any side effects. But I don't think you can really replace natural estrogen solely with plants. I think you might be able to compensate by having a very strong gut microbiome to some extent, but I don't think specifically you can get enough blood levels of estrogen really to make much of a difference.
Yeah. So, I mean, can you just quickly tell everyone about the Zoe personalized nutrition and how people can obviously find out a bit more about it and about the work you do?
Yeah, so it's available if you have an address in the United States, and it has been for about the last 15 months, and no restrictions there. In the UK, we've just started an early release version in the UK, and we're at the moment, if you're already on the wait list, which some people have been on for several years, we've got 180,000 people now on that wait list, and we're basically prioritizing them to see if they want to buy the product or not. But that's going to ramp up very fast, very soon. So do go to the website joinzoe.com and add your name to it. And as soon as we've cleared the wait list, then we'll be offering it out to everyone else in the UK. And basically, it's you pay a single fee to get the test, and then generally a subscription for 4 months, so that you get a nutrition coach as well, and you get someone to explain your personalized scores you'd be getting, which are a combination of your fat score, your sugar score, and your gut microbiome, so that every food you want to eat or you see in the supermarket, you can get an individual score on how good or bad it is for you, and you build up menus that are going to suit you, aided by an online nutritionist. So I think it's the idea is it's a journey rather than a one-off easy fix. It's a journey, so you can understand how your body's working and get the foods that suit your body long term. We're not trying to get everyone slim in 6 weeks like on the adverts. We want this to be sustainable, so you're having a really healthy, diverse diet for the rest of your life in a way that suits your own metabolism. So I think that's the goal. And so far in the US, the results have been very good so far. That people who do that program, nearly everyone is losing some weight, averaging about 4 kilos. But the big thing they're noticing is actually energy levels and reduced hunger. And I think that's great, because we're not restricting calories. We're not telling people they can never eat this stuff. There's nothing really off the table. We're just trying to encourage people to eat healthier in a way that suits them.
Well, I think my mother is probably watching this, and I've always blamed my parents on having just bad genetics, but I think it's probably time to take some of my own responsibility. But listen, Tim, thank you so much. And I'm sorry, guys, that I've been coughing throughout. I've managed, as I said, to avoid COVID for 2 years, so it's typical. I'm suffering now, but I'm just so grateful for your time, and also, you know, thank you so much for all your work you've done through this pandemic. I have been religiously logging the Zoe app every day, and I was actually quite excited to say I tested positive finally, which is a bit of a peculiar thing to admit.
Yeah, well, we're hoping also to do some work on the menopause with that app as well. So, you know, we've got perhaps 150,000 women going through the menopause on the app with us. So it's a great chance, if we can all hold it together, to do amazing citizen science, you know, and sharing ideas, etc.
Well, you've got a good focus group here of about 23,000 women who I'm sure will happily help. So thank you again, Tim, and it's been really, really helpful. And we're recording this, and we will be sharing it on our website later with notes of how you can find out about the work that Tim's been doing, and your book that you mentioned as well. So have a good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us again.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.